Can I offer you each a final statement and to spend maybe 2 minutes or so addressing what we need to do now, whether it's policymakers or individually, whether it's in research or how we actually view parenting, what do we need to do? And Sarah, I'm going to start with you and ask that you speak and address the priority actions in your view for both organisations and individuals. What do you want to leave us with?
Well, I just had this interesting little conversation with Lana here in the chat room, and I think that's really hit a key point. So I think I'll say two things. First of all, I think the SDGs are a great framework. And I think what I've learned from the conversation with experts today who are not in my immediate field is that if we actually use them as what we are trying to achieve, multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary work becomes much easier because we are united by the aim rather than being separated by disciplinary differences, right? So I think that's number one I've learned today. Secondly, I'm totally convinced now after this conversation that the family stands at the core of all these things, right? Especially when we talk long-term change. When we talk today's change, it's a different story. But if we talk in 50 years, in 10 years, it's all about our children, and it's the families who shape these children. So who should take action? Well, that's kind of, I don't know how the other panelists feel, but I've been in this job for 25 years now. And at the beginning, I was saying, oh, the governments have to change things. And very soon did I notice that nobody's listening, right? Like I can say that a million times, the government's not listening to me. So what I've started to do for myself is to say, what can I as a researcher do?
Yes.
Because that's all I can do in my lifetime. So I will actually try quite deliberately to focus on interventions that target groups who have actually a motivation to change. So I think the action's on us. We understand what's happening. We are very strongly motivated to create change. And the best we can do is for each one of us, we have different strengths, right? My strength is not to work with policymakers. So each one of us needs to use their channels in the most powerful way to create change.
Thank you, Sarah. And the role of nudge in creating that change too is something that's really stood out in your expertise and comments today. Let me go to Sophie now. And Sophie, how do you see what needs to be done? And I can ask you to address particularly in terms of practitioners and perhaps the health sector.
Okay. Well, I think when I was thinking about this, we can't just give the health practitioner and the mental health sector better tools. We can try and do that. And one of the things is to have greater access to evidence-based parenting programs for them and more in their training. But if we don't have a wider culture that believes parenting is central to children's health and mental health, then we're not actually going to get engagement. So we were trying to do a recent study where we were doing some tuning into kids work in the child and adolescent mental health services, and parents would just, with that really, really pointy end, just will not attend parenting sessions. It is that fix my child. And I think that comes from, as I was saying before, that fear, but it's also part of that we don't have a culture that says we're all responsible for helping the development of our children. Coming back to the point that Donna raised before, the messages, I think, are about effective parenting and enabling children and helping children to thrive. They are the dual messages. But if we only focus on the child part, then we leave behind that parents are also responsible and involved in that process of change. So I'm really interested in how can we better get evidence-based parenting programs out broadly. And this might mean that we have to do this more through technology, much more. And we may not always have the evidence to see exactly how that works, but we have to, especially as parenting researchers, we have to step up and go, okay, technology is way beyond us. It's moving much faster than the research and the evidence. So how can we better make these partnerships so that parents can access parenting resources and we can lead to that cultural change where parenting becomes, yes, it is something I talk to my neighbour about at a barbecue, because I think that reflects the cultural change of parenting being important as a parenting for parents, but also for children's well-being.
Beautifully articulated. Thanks, Sophie. Donna, what do you see as the actions needed for both schools and more broadly the education sector, given your experience?
Thanks, Madonna. And that's the lens I would like to talk about, because there's such great suggestions coming from others. And obviously this relates mostly to one of the Sustainable Development Goals, number 4, which is about inclusive and equitable quality education that promotes lifelong learning for all. And that brings to mind settings-based approaches or place-based approaches. So how do we use the settings? How do we use the communities that we have to be able to deliver this evidence, assuming that there's really good quality evidence that is feeding that? But we also need to understand, and I loved Matt's comments earlier when he said we need to work out what's working for whom and what's not working for whom, in which contexts. So context is really important. And so the context that perhaps I can talk about, because we do so much work doing research in schools, is the context of school. And how do we get the system to support schools to engage with parents and make parents as partners, really more than the lip service that possibly it gets at the moment to the education partnership. It's the setting where we have the greatest access to parents and future parents. So we have our future parents in schools as well that we need to be modelling. So capacity building, really building those levels of trust, the trusted messenger that Darryl talked about earlier on. And most importantly, I think we also need to be, in addition to getting parents to think about their parenting behaviours, to also think about how they value education, because we know when parents value education, children do much better, and particularly when children engage in early education. Children who are in early education get the better outcomes. So our setting is critical, and we need to make sure that we are providing culturally safe and secure environments for children.
Donna, thank you. Our schools are lucky to have access to your research. Just terrific. So let's move on to policymakers and government and the crucial role they have here. Darryl, can I ask you to spend a couple of minutes on how you see the priorities there?
Thanks, Madonna. Yeah, look, I think when we want to bring about any community change, any major change, we have to first of all think about the infrastructure that's needed. And so, you know, we all know that if we want children to be educated, we have to start with doing things like building schools and providing tertiary education for teachers. We want to bring about a reduction in reliance on cars. We have to have a major investment in public transport, or the mechanisms for uptake of electric vehicles, like, you know, your plug-in top-up power things. So I think some of the obstacle that we have is that we don't really believe that child maltreatment is preventable, or that supports for parents are possible, and the role that positive parenting can have in creating those safe and supportive environments for all children to grow up and thrive. Because if we did, then we would have that comparable kind of investment. So I believe that we actually need to create a kind of a cross-portfolio, cross-governments, you know, all Commonwealth government levels, but also state and territory governments, but also local governments, who are all involved in engaging with the community and with parents, and map across that where, against the different SDGs, we need the investment in order to provide those evidence-based supports for all parents at some stage. And we know that we can do this if, in fact, we drive this change at the community level. And in fact, if we make sure that that kind of normalized help seeking is embedded through the existing infrastructure that we have. You know, we're lucky in Australia that we actually have good you know, kind of public health systems, we have good education systems. Why don't we do more to build off the, you know, the physical infrastructure of, you know, GP clinics and early childhood centres and schools and so forth, in order to make this more widely available. I'd also just add my support to the comments that Matt made before around the need for a national parenting survey. Absolutely agree. We need to be tracking that capability building of parents, you know, right across the life cycle. Also, I'm involved in the Australian Child Maltreatment Study, and we're collecting data for the first time about people's experiences of corporal punishment, as well as all forms of child abuse and neglect. And we need to have an investment in tracking that over time to see whether future cohorts, in fact, experience a reduction in that harsh parenting.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Darryl. Finally, can I go to you, Matt Sanders, Director of the Parenting and Family Support Centre at the University of Queensland? The priorities in relation to parenting researchers and academia? How do you see them going forward?
Look, I really think we need dedicated funding that comes through the different competitive grant schemes to put a real spotlight on this as an area that requires research investment. As Sophie said previously, the level of investment by government research schemes in this space is very poor. Now, that could be for a number of reasons, but given the importance of parenting, it's crucial to have greater investment in that. The other thing is that we really need governments to step up to the plate to invest in programs that have already been shown to work. Australia is a world leader in parenting research. We've got plenty of high quality evidence-based parenting programs that are just not scaled adequately to have a level of population reach that would enable prevalence rate reductions in problems like child maltreatment and other issues. The other thing that I would say is that most of the the preparation of practitioners to work in the human services sector gives nowhere near the degree of emphasis to the importance of parent consultation skills. And most of the training that is done is in-service training. And I mean, that's still an absolutely legitimate context because these are the workforces that are ready and able to actually deliver the programs only if their design of work makes it a priority. If it's always an add-on or a bolt-on to what you do, you're going to get an under-deployment of these interventions by people who potentially could deliver many, many, many more interventions to support parents if it was given organisational priority and the workforce was adequately supported, supervised, and a work environment was created where this is a really serious part of the work that you do. In our experience, a lot of people who do parenting programs, it's a bolt-on to something else, and that it makes it less likely that they will continue. The future of the digital world, or the current digital world, is meaning that parents are looking for many more ways of accessing high-quality evidence-based programs online. We've recently completed a randomised trial comparing in-person delivery of PPP with online delivery, and at 12 months follow-up, there were identical outcomes in terms of improved parenting and improved changes in child behaviour. And for every one in-person delivery, 14 people could do it online. And so they're much more cost effective, but they're not mutually exclusive. We're always going to need a blended model of in-person and online supports. But I would say, after being in this game for 40 years myself, the one thing that I'd absolutely love to see is a serious policy-based commitment to invest in the scale-up of high-quality evidence-based programs so that it just becomes absolutely socially normative to prepare for parenthood, like it does doing your license to be able to drive a car. And I tell you, more people do damage through parenting than they do through road accidents.
Yeah, and a great point to end on. Thank you. And what an interesting discussion across the board. And if you look at the themes we've talked about, they come down to a couple of things. But what stands out to me, I guess, is how evidence-based parenting support can make a material difference to parents and families, but also more broadly. That's at the centre of the discussions of each of our panel members, how it can assist in tackling some of the broader problems we have, those at the heart of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that discussion about having an added goal relating specifically to parenting, raised by several on our panel, is really worth coming back to, perhaps offline. There are challenges raised by our panelists to the use of parenting support programs, a myriad of them, as we've discussed. But this year, I guess, has probably gifted us with an insight on the importance of taking on those challenges, of thinking differently, of working together with clearly defined goals. And our panel today has looked at how we can develop parenting programs further, the need to work together and how we might do that, how we balance priorities, and that crucial need for investment. And the need for parenting, I guess, to be seen as a community-wide issue, not something required by parents who are not coping. Blame doesn't build engagement. That's been made clear to me today. Mainly, though, I think our panel has painted a picture of what we can achieve if we do this. If we use evidence in our parenting approaches and policy, we can create a thriving world for our children and our families, our communities, our nation, and even the treasured planet we call home. My thanks to the panel, Professor Matthew Sanders, Professor Donna Cross, Professor Darryl Higgins, Professor Sarah Donachar, and Professor Sophie Havikhurst for their generosity of their time and their answers. Thanks to our sponsors too, and a reminder that this discussion has been recorded and details of future seminars will be on the PFSC and PAFRA websites. Resources that support today's discussion and the email addresses of those who participated in today's panel will also be made available. I'm Madonna King, and thank you, those of you listening today, policymakers and researchers, politicians and parents, teachers and trainers from across the globe. It's together, a point made repeatedly by our panel, that we can make a real difference. Thank you.